Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Premiership Quarter. Today, I'm going to be doing Fine Margins, episode 2, where I'm doing a recap of every game from this week's, where there are only 8 because we had 2 teams having a bye, being Carlton and Brisbane. And I'll also be going through the AFL's posted article of 8 things we learned this time. To start with, I am going to be talking about my review of St Kilda versus Collingwood. Now, as you can see just behind me here, I'm a Saints fan and I went to the game on Thursday night. And to put it simply, I am over the moon. I thought really after the Mason Wood injury, we really picked up our pressure. We were able to force Collingwood into some unforced errors, really. The player like Dacos and Tom Mitchell were really fumbly around the ball. Thought Marcus Wintaker and Zach Jones were really able to get to work in the middle and were able to really amp up the pressure, and it did force a lot of turnovers there. And we also forced Collingwood to make a couple mistakes in the air. Players like Side, Bottom, and Moore not always making the right decisions. And we also forced them into making some bad decisions in terms of free kicks, a lot of hitting when we were taking a mark, a lot of hitting on the head. And so I think we played a really good game. In terms of Collingwood, a lot of players had a down game. Darcy Moore, in terms of his aerial presence, was a lot stronger, especially in that first half. But he also was very fumbly with the ball and he had a few costly turnovers. So there's still room for improvement for him. Billy Frampton had an excellent first half, except for the free kicks. And then he sort of quieted down in terms of intercept marking ability in the second half. But I think their forward line still needs a bit of work. Jamie Elliott had a great game, but Lockie Schultz really needs to step up if he wants to prove himself in this team. Mason Cox and Brody Mychek have also struggled to hit the scoreboard, and Rafe McInnes was pretty good for them. But outside of that, they just need a lot of players to pick up their game and get back to where they were last year if they can. But I do think they can. I think it'll be very poor for them to not be able to get back to their 2023 best. On the Friday night was Adelaide versus Geelong in Adelaide, and it was a pretty poor game for Adelaide. I thought they couldn't really hit targets. They really struggled kicking inside 50, especially. I believe they're the worst ranked side after the first 2.5 rounds, really, in terms of efficiency inside 50. Even though they're getting it in there, I think they're almost averaging 60 inside 50s a game. So in terms of getting it in there, they're fine. But if you want to look at the way they played, they started off with Luke Pedlar on Tom Stewart, and it didn't work. Stewart's just a much better aerial player than Luke Pedlar, so it was an interesting choice in the first place. And then they just decided to have a free at the stoppage. And when they don't have great ball users, players like Laird, Crouch, Saligo, Ben Keys when he was up at the stoppage, they just really weren't able to find targets. They weren't making the right decisions. And that's sort of where you got to go with Rankin and Rochelle as your better ball users, and even put a Brody Smith or Wayne Miller in there to be able to hit those targets going inside 50. It would really change things. But Stewart was just able to control everything, and they weren't able to do much damage going inside 50. And then for Geelong, it was actually a really good game from them. They stood up when needed, and they were able to hold off a comeback from Adelaide. And it's a really good win for them. They now have to deal with Dangerfield out for 2 weeks. And so that's going to be interesting to see their midfield go. But I believe they're getting Atkins back. They should be getting Bruin back as well from the weekend. And so hopefully they can sort of keep this momentum going as well as possible. They'll probably have to need Cameron to even potentially play some midfield time, but really, really get going. On the Saturday now was North Melbourne versus Fremantle. And Fremantle once again are showing that they have some real fight in them this year. And that even when they're down by 4 or 5 goals, they're able to get their game going and they're able to hit the scoreboard. Luke Jackson was probably man of the match. He was so good going forward and he was excellent going back as well. And his ability and agility in the middle really makes a difference for him as a ruckman. There are very few, if any, in the AFL that can match his speed and his smarts in the middle, playing as essentially another midfielder after the ruck contest. I thought Jai Amos could have had a much better game, but again, accuracy was a bit of a concern with him, which normally he's very good with. but they were just able to hit the scoreboard really quickly in that patch where they kicked 9 straight goals, and North just weren't able to do anything. So it's a really good win for Fremantle to get back into their 2022 form potentially, and they're able to get Darcy back in, I think, 3 weeks. So it'll be really interesting to see where they head with that matchup. Next is Hawthorn versus Melbourne, and this is also a very interesting, really, first quarter. After that, it was very Melbourne centric, but they just struggled to move the ball. They played a lot of side to side and kick to kick footy essentially. Sicily, I think, took 9 marks in the first quarter, all of them uncontested, and they tried to control the game. They probably thought that they're a decent kicking side, and if because of Melbourne's such good defensive zone, they could potentially chip around it. They'd be able to get scoring on the board easier because they probably thought they couldn't get through in their own way. But it just didn't work. They weren't able to penetrate through the zone. And when they tried to, they would turn it over. And Melbourne were very good on the counter. Bailey Frisch was excellent, kicking 5. Pickett was at his best, kicking 3. And Oliver and Petrarca were just at their best. And they really controlled the game from the middle after the first quarter. Sydney versus Essendon. Sydney are just looking so good right now. Them and GWS are probably the two best teams, and we'll get to GWS later. But Essendon could not defend their ball movement whatsoever. I was watching First Crack, and they showed where Essendon were relatively well set up, but they were very compact when Sydney were trying to exit defensive 50, and one player leading towards the middle completely ruined it, and it was sort of like a 2-1-2, but they were very, very compact towards the wing. They weren't open, and they weren't able to move. So the second something breaks, it just opened up, and Sydney were really able to score heavily, and that's going to be something Essendon really need to improve. Obviously, you had the hit with Peter Wright on Cunningham early, and I'll be making another video with that as like a second video to my original one, because I really like that one with Peter Wright and Max King hit and what I think of the result, because I'm recording this on the Tuesday night. But not Errol Gordon, he did have a good game, but Isaac Heaney was probably another 3-vote performance this week. He's just performed superbly in the middle for them so far this year, hasn't put a foot wrong at all, and Tom Papley had another excellent game, kicking 4 goals and having over 20 disposals. So their high half forward is actually having a real impact in the middle a bit more without Mills, without Parker, and without Adams early on. In terms of the Sunday games, the Bulldogs got a really good win over the Suns. There was a big breeze in Ballarat, and so they were able to really heavily put it on the scoreboard in the first quarter, kicking with the breeze. And Gold Coast really weren't able to get it back after about halfway through the second. They never really challenged the Bulldogs, and I thought Bontempelli really stood up. It was a great watch between Libba and Rao, the two tough nuts in and under with the ball. And I think the Bulldogs got their selection correct this week. It'll be interesting to see who they go with now in defence with no Nick Caulfield, who I believe had a dislocated shoulder and he's had to get surgery on it. So that's probably 3 months out, which is very unfortunate, not able to stay fully healthy in another season. But for Gold Coast, I think it's a bit of a warning sign. It shows that they're not always going to perform, and they probably need to be a bit more defensively solid, because allowing a Bulldogs team who has showed a lot of inconsistency to score 115 points is probably not where you want to be so far this season. The next game, Richmond versus Port Adelaide, I went to with a friend, and it was actually a really interesting game. He thought at the start that Richmond weren't going to be in the contest for a lot of it, but they were, and they really, really pushed Port Adelaide, I thought. They really struggled to defend the MCG ground. Port Adelaide like to press up as high as possible to really squeeze the opposition backline and really pressure them into forcing mistakes coming out of their defensive 50. But in a larger ground like the MCG, it just didn't work, and Richmond were able to capitalise on enough occasions to make it a close game. And when there is a difference in talent on the teams like there was, then just keeping it close can really help. And Liam Baker kicking 2 goals in about a minute to finish the third quarter to put it to 7 points. At that stage, I actually thought Richmond could win, but it really depended for me on Shea Bolton. and whether he could really impact the game. Because in the first half, he was exceptional. I think he had 2 goals and 15 touches, and he was super dangerous on the counter attack. But Port Adelaide made the right decision, and they put Willem Drew on him, and he really shut him down. And after that, the way Port Adelaide started the fourth, they took control of the game and never really looked back. And that sort of is what won them the game. Willem Drew, I think, probably deserves at least a vote because of the role he played on Shea Bolton. He was really dangerous in that second quarter. He was getting up the ground and was really damaging Port on the counter. And that's what won them the game in the end, shutting him down. So it was a good bit of tactical work from Ken Hinkley, and it was good for them to be able to get the win away from home against a relatively good, talented team in Richmond. And lastly, again, that we probably don't need to talk a lot about was West Coast and GWS. They're the best team in the AFL at the moment. They're playing the best, they're the most in form, and they want to make the most out of this season. They have the most to play for. I think with all their talk over the offseason of, hey, we know we're the best team. We know we were better than Collingwood last year. Them and Melbourne probably saying that both, but I think the way GWS have handled it has probably been a bit better, and they just were able to get a pretty good win. So that's the round review of each team, in my opinion, and I'll now get to 8 things we learned. Now I'll get into the 8 things we learned, and I believe this one is written by, let's see, staff writers, so they don't really say. It's probably a collection of different fans writing their own. Tomahawk isn't slowing down for the Cats and Adelaide game, and he was pretty good, but again, Adelaide's strength is not their key defenders, so he's just sort of capitalizing on their weakness. He was okay against St Kilda in round one, but he did show his best against Adelaide. It's whether he's going to be able to do this every night, because I think, well, not every night, but every game for Geelong, I think he probably needs to do this most nights for them to challenge at the highest level. And it's clear they want to do that because they're still stuck with a relatively older list. So it's a bit of a yes right now, but by the end of the season, it'll be a show and tell. If he's able to do it, we'll see the best of Geelong more than likely, but the chances are he will slightly regress from his best, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that because he is old and he needs to get out of the league now, as a Saints fan. Number 2 is Luke Jackson's form has created a Dockle dilemma, and yes, I 100% agree with this, and I think you'll hopefully be able to see a video from me. I've teased this a little bit, where I'm going to create a opinion video that's going to be a new style to this channel, where I'm talking about why I don't believe the 2 ruckman style will work, and how the fact that you need very specific ruckman and very specific types of ruckman to be able to succeed in it. And I just don't think Jackson and Darcy are those 2. And I'll be talking about different examples. I'll give my reasoning. And so I do agree with this. I just don't think their best will be able to be at the same time. Darcy's best was in 2022 when he was the lone ruckman. Jackson's best was when Darcy was out of the team at the back end of last year and so far this year. And so it doesn't. There's no real evidence to show that these 2 can play together at their best this so far in the year and a bit that they've played on the same team. And so I absolutely agree. And the fact that Luke Jackson has been performing so well, it might indicate that they prefer him over Sean Darcy due to his problems with his body. So if he doesn't get that right, they might want to move off from him by the end of the season. I know there are a couple of teams interested. And then for the Bulldogs, the young dogs justified Bevo's brave call. And at the moment, that's probably correct. You can't really criticize him too much because they did beat a decent team so far in Gold Coast. But it was also a really interesting game to watch because it was very one-sided in terms of dominance, where the Breeze really controlled which team dominated in that quarter. And I didn't really get to watch too much of it. I watched about a quarter and a bit. But at the moment, their young guns have been playing really well. They've talked about Riley Sanders, Harvey Gallagher, and it's true, they've performed really well. But as younger players do, they tail off in the back end of seasons. And it's just about if they can match the best form of the older players to when the younger players start to drop off. And if they're able to minimize the impact of the younger players and the energy they might be able to bring to a relatively older list, then it'll be really good and they can push for the 8 absolutely. Number 4 is the basics are haunting Collingwood, and that is 1000% true. They were very, very fumbly in the middle against St Kilda. They made a lot of aerial mistakes and a lot of poor free kick decisions against St Kilda, and it cost them dearly. Jack Higgins got, I think, 3 of them. One was a free kick against Billy Frampton, one was a poor spoil from Darcy Moore, and another was a poor spoil from Steele Sidebottom. So it's just the fact that St Kilda were able to capitalise it showed a bit more, but it was very open for Higgins to be able to capitalise it. There was no defender between him and the goals in any of them. So they lost a bit of their structure down back, and Nathan Murphy is really important to them, and it's showing right now how important he was last year. But I think their wingers, I think Dacos and Sidebottom need to step up their game. Jack Crisp clearly has taken a step back. Scott Pendlebury has as well, but at his age, you can't blame him. Jordan DeGoey needs to get back to his best. I know Ross Lyon was talking about being able to stop him as their weapon, really. And if he doesn't get back to his best, it might be a bit of a time for Collingwood to blood some youth, someone like Finlay McRae, to get some more game time. 5th is going to be Kieran Briggs personifies the Ruthless Giant, and that's pretty fair. Again, it's against West Coast. There's not too much to say against them when you've got a top 4 team battling against probably a bottom 2 team. Obviously, the best players are going to shine. I thought Lockie Whitfield was excellent, as he always is, and he personifies their ball movement. But the physicality that they like to bring, how they want to be in the contest, is definitely personified with Kieran Briggs. So absolutely agree with that one. 6, Sydney's spread of attacking weapons is unmatched. It's a fair call, I'd say. They've really drafted skillful back half users. You've got Braden Campbell and his excellent left foot, Errol Goulden, who's more of a winger midfielder, Nick Blakey, Jake Lloyd, who's been on their list for a little while, Ollie Florent, who can play a bit of midfield as well. They've just got really elite users off there, and it's really hard for teams to stop because matching elite speed and elite ball use, what are you meant to do when they can carve you open so easily? As I talked about earlier, Essendon were just not able to stop it, and I think it's going to be a real weapon for them this year. And their forward line with McDonald, McLean, and Amati, probably still one of them hasn't hit that level, but with the ball use they are getting and the cleanliness of kicks inside 50 to them, they don't need to be elite players because they are benefiting off everything that Sydney want to do, and it's really helped them develop. And with their midfield potentially getting a couple key pieces back, Isaac Heaney might play a bit more forward. It'll really free up him, and maybe he can potentially finish top 10 in a Brownlow this year and push for an All-Australian squad place. Number 7, the D's need to feel whole before it comes a canyon. And it's come out with the injury list that it's going to be 1 week for Stephen May potentially, and Jake Lever should be okay, but he might be rested. And I think they don't have the depth, but then again, when you put so much time and money into plays like Jake Lever and Stephen May, you're sort of going to have to take it on the chin, really. Adam Tomlinson will probably come into the team for Stephen May. Harry Petty might have to go back and play that role. They've obviously got Tom McDonald there at the moment. And it might be a forward line of Ben Brown, Jacob Van Rooyen, and then Bailey Frisch as your third option. And then down back, it might have to be Petty, Tomlinson, and McDonald as the 3 keys. And that's not great. It's not what you really want. I think they're playing Port Adelaide, and so Port Adelaide might be able to get the upper edge. And so for the more short-term future, yes, but they'll also need to keep in mind that long-term future, they don't have anyone to really fill in that spot. They've got Matthew Jefferson in the ranks, but is that going to be as a sort of third forward or as a second forward, or does Harrison Petty go back and you've got Van Rooyen, Frisch, and Jefferson as your three key forward for the future. But they got lucky, I think, with May being able to only be out 1 week, and Lever not doing a bad knee injury has really helped as well. And then number 8, Travis Boak finally got his moment. It's just great to see. Port Adelaide were pretty good, and it's great for such a great player and a great leader and a veteran to get his moment and be able to get chaired off in a win. And so it's great for him and his team to celebrate a real excellent player for this club. So that's going to be my second episode of Fine Margins. This should be a recurring video every week. My computer's getting sorted at the moment, so hopefully it'll be done and I can just get some more videos out. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button. It'll really help push the video in the YouTube algorithm. Subscribe to this channel if you like this type of content, and there'll be a lot more to come. Leave your thoughts in the comments below about what you think and how you thought each team played, and thanks for watching.